Hello and welcome to another episode of MVS Vedic Astro. Today we're going to be discussing dashas and antardashas and how these two elements can be used to make predictions. However, before I get into dashas and antardashas, I wanted to do a quick practice of what we learned in the last episode. Here we have an example birth chart, and let's assume that in the example birth chart, the Lagna Lord or the Lagna house is represented by the number 4. The question would be, who is the Lagna Lord or owner of the first house? Because it's represented by the number 4, we can say that number 4 is the Cancer Rashi, and the Lord of the Cancer Rashi is Moon. Now let's say, for our example purposes, Moon resides in the 10th house of this individual's birth chart. First of all, we would know it's the 10th house because we would count anti-clockwise from the Lagna house or the first house until we get to 10, and you will most likely see the letters MO in the 10th house. Assuming that we had nothing else to go off on, and that was the only information we had, what could we infer from that information? What are some of the things that Moon represents? Some of those include emotions and changes. What are some of the things the 10th house represents? Work and status. So again, if we were not looking at the rest of the horoscope and this is all we had to go on, a really basic inference you could make with this information is that this may be a sensitive individual because Moon represents emotions and it owns their Lagna house. And because it's sitting in the 10th house, you could say that their focus in life is on their work. So this is how you start to make linkages between planets, where they sit, which Rashi represents what house, and so on. So now let's dive into today's topic, which is dashas and antardashas. So what are dashas and antardashas? At the most basic level, the way to understand this is that a dasha is a period of time during which a specific planet is ruling over you. Each planet rules for a different amount of time, but during its rule, there are sub-periods or antardashas when there is influence of another planet in addition to the planet that is ruling over you. Overall, each planet, as I mentioned, rules for a different amount of time, but overall they add up to a total of 120 years. So, Sun, if we were looking at the Maha-Dasha and not the Antardasha, Sun has a Maha-Dasha of 6 years. Moon has a Maha-Dasha of 10 years. Mars is 7 years. Rahu is 18 years. Jupiter is 16 years. Saturn is 19. Mercury is 17 years. K2 is 7 years. And finally, Venus is the longest one, which is 20 years. So in total, these Maha-Dashas end up being 120 years. As you can imagine, it is unlikely that one individual will go through each and every Maha-Dasha, as most people wouldn't live up till 120. How do Antardashas work? So let's say Sun is ruling over you currently for 6 years. During this 6-year period, each of the other planets will influence Sun and you during this time. And each of those periods vary depending on that own planet's overall time frame. There are ways to calculate it. You don't necessarily need to learn the calculation. When you go and create your own birth chart, this information is generally made available. However, what's important to understand is how Antardashas work and how the cycle works. So Maha-Dashas will always work in this chronological order. So after Sun will always be Moon, after Moon will always be Mars, after Mars will always be Rahu, after Rahu it'll be Jupiter, after Jupiter it'll be Saturn, after Saturn it'll be Mercury, after Mercury it'll be Ketu, and finally after Ketu it'll be Venus. However, not everyone is born in the Sun Maha-Dasha. People are born in various sorts of Maha-Dashas, right? So if somebody was born in Mars, you basically go down from Mars. So if they are under the Maha-Dasha of Mars, once that Maha-Dasha is over, they will now be under the Maha-Dasha of Rahu, and then Jupiter, and then Saturn, and so on. Antardashas work in a similar fashion. So if somebody is currently under the Sun Maha-Dasha, the first Antardasha under a planet is always that of itself. So for a period of time, that individual in this case will be under Sun's Maha-Dasha and Sun's Antardasha. Then you will have Moon under Sun's Maha-Dasha, then Mars, then Rahu, then Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Ketu, and Venus. Like I said, that order never changes. So let's say somebody was under Jupiter's Maha-Dasha. The first Antardasha under Jupiter will be Jupiter and Jupiter. Then you start working down from Jupiter. So what Maha-Dasha comes after Jupiter? Saturn. So what Antardasha will come next under Jupiter? It'll be Saturn. So you'll have the combination of Jupiter-Saturn, then Jupiter-Mercury, then Jupiter-Ketu, Jupiter-Venus, Jupiter-Sun, Jupiter-Moon, Jupiter-Mars, and Jupiter-Rahu. So once you get to Venus, it doesn't end. You sort of go back to the top. So after Jupiter-Venus, we went back to Jupiter-Sun, then Moon, then Mars, then Rahu. So that order never changes. And like I said, Sun's Maha-Dasha would be 6 years. So each of these other planets coming under that Maha-Dasha would be for a much shorter time frame in terms of their influence over the individual versus the Maha-Dasha of Jupiter, for example, which is 16 years. The time frame each planet will influence over that 16-year period is obviously larger. So with this information, let's go back to the chart that we were discussing earlier, the example chart where the individual's Lagna Lord is Moon and the Lagna house is represented by the Rashi number 4. Let's add another element to it. Let's say for this individual, Jupiter sits in their 11th house, and currently they are going through the Moon Maha-Dasha. So if they're going through the Moon Maha-Dasha, and now the Antardasha under that Moon Maha-Dasha is Jupiter, we can make some predictions using that information. Again, it's always best to read the horoscope in totality, but we are just working with example and limited information for learning purposes. So again, if the only information we have is the Lagna Lord Moon is sitting in the 10th house and Jupiter is sitting in the 11th house, and this person is currently going through Moon's Maha-Dasha and Jupiter's Antardasha, you could say that this individual may see some gains in their work life. You know, they may see some progression happening. They may see some increase in their income. All of the things that the 11th house represents and some of the things that Jupiter represents. So Jupiter represents expansion, 11th house represents income. And since Moon is in their 10th house, you could say work related, they might see some expansion in their income. 11th house also talks about the friend circle or your social circle. Jupiter talks about expansion, so somebody's social circle might expand during this period, so on and so forth. So this is how you make those linkages. So I hope this was a useful lesson today, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thank you again for listening. And if you are looking for your own horoscope readings, please visit mvsvedicastro.com. That is mvsvedicastro.com. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.